Welcome to another one of our wee clips on wildlife in different habitats. I'm Roger Powell, Senior Ranger, and today we're going to look at rocky shores. There's no such thing as a typical rocky shore. This one here is quite a good one. It's got lots of pools in it, lots of rocks and things. And the first thing you should know about looking for creatures on rocky shores is you don't have to be in the middle of a pool. A lot of the creatures will live outside the pool as long as they can stay damp. They'll hide underneath the rocks, and that's the clue to what we're going to be looking at today, is being underneath the rocks, having to look underneath them. These are creatures that are sea creatures. They want to stay damp, they don't want to dry out, they don't want to get eaten by predators, so they'll be hiding underneath the rock while the tide is out. So you have to have an effort really to turn the rocks over and have a look underneath. Always remember though, once you've had a look underneath, please turn the rock back again when you found it. So without further ado, let's go and have a look and see what we can find. So let's start with the crabs then, and the first one I've got here is an edible crab. They tend to curl themselves up in a ball like that to protect themselves when you pick them up. But the identifying feature is nice oval shell, looks like a pie crust around the edge, like somebody's crimped it. And they've got black tips to their claws under there. So 10 legs for a crab. This one is quite interesting because it has, in its tail here, a parasite. And this is, believe it or not, a type of barnacle. It doesn't look like a barnacle, but it's a parasitic barnacle, which starts off inside the crab, but part of it comes out of the crab and under where a female crab would normally carry her eggs, underneath this wee tail here. So I'm going to put this one back down, and in my other hand here I have a broad-clawed porcelain crab. This is as big as they get. They don't get any bigger than that. That's a full-sized one. They're called porcelain crab because if you turn them underneath, they have this sort of porcelain white colour underneath. You can see it most on their claws. Very big claws. They actually have little tiny hooks on their legs as well to grip, and this one's gripping quite strongly onto my thumb just now. They walk around the underside of rocks, and they're eating anything they can get hold of, bits of seaweed, little bits of different pieces of food, things, that sort of thing. Okay, I'm going to put them, there's quite a lot of them on this beach. I'll put this one back. When you turn over some of the rocks on the beaches here, you often find small fish darting about, and the sort of fish we normally get are things like blennies, gobies, butterfish, that sort of thing. But here's a slightly more unusual one, which you don't find that often, and this one's a scorpion fish. And you can identify it by its head, which looks massive compared to the rest of its body. It makes it look almost like a small dragon. And I'm not going to keep it out very long. He needs to be back in the water, so I'm going to put him back just now. This is another crab. This one's a shore crab, a bit more feisty than the edible crab we were looking at. It's got its claws out there, it's trying to get hold of me. Again, 10 legs on a crab, decapods they're called. The front two are modified legs, and you can see that it's got one claw bigger than the other, so the right claw is bigger than the left, which is normal in crabs. They tend to be right-handed, but you do find left-handed ones every now and again. They have very delicate mouths up here, these sets of mandibles, but so they can't eat big clumps of food, so they have to mash them up. So in the claw, and you might just be able to see that in the claw, it's got almost like a set of teeth in its claw, a bit like the molars that you have in the back of your mouth, and it uses its claw to crunch things up into smaller bits and feed itself with. This one is a female. You can tell by the tail underneath. Not many people realise that crabs have a tail, which is folded up under here, and it's quite wide because when the flap comes up, that's where she holds the eggs, the egg mass underneath that tail. And a male's is a much thinner one. So continuing the crab theme, you can probably just about see here, this is a periwinkle shell, but inside is a hermit crab. Hermit crabs don't grow their own shell, they can't grow their own shell on their back, so they need to find something else to shelter in, so they use empty shells of things like periwinkles, and then bigger things like big whelks when they get a bit bigger, and they always have to look around for new homes because as they grow they need a bigger home. They usually have, you can't see it very well on here, but they usually have one big claw which they use like a front door, so they'll stick the claw in front of themselves like this, and it stops any other crabs from getting in, because they will fight for empty houses. And they feel inside them, and then if they think it's a bigger one, they'll come out of this one and back into the new one to test it out. This one's not playing the game. He's being very still at the moment, so I think I better put him back. So here we found underneath one of the rocks, and this is a sea urchin. Not like the big sea urchins that you often find the shells of or the washed up on the shore. This is purple sea urchin, or sometimes known as a green sea urchin. And sea urchins are related to starfish. They have the same sort of tube feet that starfish have, and these spines on their body. And these spines will move back and forward. And it has a type of behaviour which is called hatting, because if you leave it somewhere long enough, it will gradually grab hold of bits and pieces of debris. And you can see here it's actually picked up 2 periwinkles and a piece of seaweed and plonked it on top of its head in an effort to try and camouflage itself. Underneath, it's got a mouth. It has a bit that's known as a beak in the middle. Looks a bit like, I suppose, an eagle's beak when you see it moving. And it uses that to scrape the rock or to scrape seaweed, which is what its main food is. So what we have here is a brittle star. They're related to starfish. They look a lot like starfish, but you can see the way it's moving. It tends to thrash around like that as it's moving about. They are called brittle stars because they are quite delicate and they can quite easily lose their arm or parts of their arm, which is actually quite a good response to a predator. So if something like a fish comes on and bites the end of their arm, they can leave the fish with that bit of arm and move away, and they can grow the arm back again, which is quite clever. They're mostly scavengers on the beach. They're looking for dead, dying things to eat. But out in the sea, they can actually filter feed. And they like being in strong currents because that brings the food to them quite easily. Trouble is they can get washed away in the current. So what they do quite often is they form mats. They will link arms with a neighbouring brittle star, say 2 or 3 arms, and then they can stick 2 or 3 arms up into the current and catch bits of food that come past. And that allows them to stay in that current, which is bringing all that food to them, which is actually quite clever. So this is a common starfish, which we just found. 5 arms on a starfish. Most starfish, or certainly many species of starfish, have 5 arms. There's a few that don't. Some have quite a lot more, in fact, some species. This one's a common one, it's got 5. Also has 5 eyes at the end of each of its arm. Now they're not eyes that are complicated, a bit like our eyes or any other mammal's eyes, but they are really just light-sensitive cells at the end of the arm. Up this rock, because underneath is a sea anemone, a beadless anemone, trying to keep it just under the water so you can see that the tentacles are still more or less out, because when it's exposed it pulls them all in, covers itself with mucus, which is a bit like the stuff that comes out of your nose, and that stops it from drying out. It's almost like putting some sort of cover over yourself to stop yourself from drying out. So they're looking for tiny bits of food that are coming past, and each of those tentacles has got a stinging cell on the end, too weak to sting you. If you touch the end of the tentacles, it just feels quite sticky on the end. They don't actually like living next to each other because they're looking for currents of water to bring food across to them, because they don't move normally. And if they got another anemone right next to them, they're competing for the same food. So what they sometimes do is they fight, and they do that by headbutting each other. It's in slow motion. It looks quite funny on a speeded up camera, but they headbutt each other and sting each other, and eventually one of them will give up and move away. And it can do that either by sliding along on its base, or it can somersault over onto its tentacles and then over again onto its base, so it's away from its competitor. A bit of an unusual find on the beach here. There's not so many of these around. You normally find these further out to sea, but occasionally you get the smaller ones on the shore. And this is called a squat lobster. It's almost like a cross between a crab and a lobster, and really big long claws there. But they are quite often really delicate colours. You can't see when they're out of the water like this, but if you see the ones that are offshore, particularly go diving at night and you've got a torch and you shine them, and these things will come out and they fluoresce really lovely colours all over the back. This one is desperately trying to bite my finger here, panicking a wee bit, it is. So I think I better put it back. Okay, so I've got two types of sea snail here. The one on my left is a dog whelk. It has that sort of pointed spire on it. And also, if you look in the mouth of the shell, it's got this groove. And it uses that to push part of its foot through. Because it's a predator. Around here it's feeding mostly on barnacles, which it bores through using mechanical and chemical means. And it turns the animal inside the barnacle shell there into a pulp. And then it can sort of suck that back in again. That's the way it feeds. The other one here is a periwinkle, type of periwinkle. Much rounder opening, darker shell, and this is a herbivore, so it's walking along the rocks with rather like a long sandpapery tongue, which it's using to sort of lick the rock, taking off any microscopic seaweed that's on there, and that's what it feeds on. So we found as rock here, which is covered in very, very small barnacles, but also amongst the barnacles are these limpets, and these are they're quite primitive sea snails really. They've been around for millions of years, and again, rather like the periwinkle, they are walking along the rock, sliding along the rock, and they have a really rough tongue called a radula, which they use to scrape the rock of any seaweed. One interesting thing about limpets is they have different lengths of tongue depending on where they live. So the ones living nearer the sea will have quite a short tongue, and the ones that are living much further up the beach have a long tongue. The reason for having the long tongue when you live that far up the beach is you're not covered by the water very much. So when you are covered and you can walk around, you need to eat rather quickly, and having a longer tongue means you can gather more material in a short space of time, so that you can actually get enough food to live. These limpets will also come back to the same spot every time on the rock before the tide goes out completely. And some of the older limpets, when they've died, they leave scars on the rock. And there are one or two sort of groove or holes on the rock here, which may have been left as scars by limpets as they sort of grind their way into the rock there to hold themselves fast, so they don't get washed away by any waves when the tide comes in. So thank you for watching. I hope that's inspired you maybe to come out and have a look at some of the rock pools yourselves, maybe find some things that we didn't find. If you've got any questions or things that you found and that you don't know what they are and you want to find out, you can ask us. Please contact us. We're always happy to hear what you've got to say. And look out for other videos of ours that we do on other habitats. And if there's anything you particularly think you want us to film, then let us know and we'll see if we can accommodate that too. Thank you.